Hi everyone, here is our discussion for ACC6. Okay, so I'm very sorry, hindi ko kayang magkaroon ng video na kita yung sarili ko because due to technical issues, yung taga-capture ng aking video, which is inaayos ko pa, hindi ko talaga maayos pa. Okay, so I need technical help. Okay, anyway, so today I'll be discussing list part 1. So, what I am going to discuss ngayon, you actually need to browse yung mga chapter sa book nyo about list, kung saan siya pumapatak. Okay, kasi hinati ko siya sa 2 parts, list part 1 and list part 2. Okay, list part 1 is actually part of the lessee. Okay, so medyo magaan pa siya. List part 2 is yung medyo sa books na kasi ni lesser medyo hindi naman mabigat. Kumbaga, mas mabigat siya compared sa part 1. Okay? So, you just have to look at the topics na i-discuss ko here sa chapter sa book niya. Okay? So, yon. So, let's start. So, list part 1, this is actually governed by PFRS 16, which is leases. Okay? So, learning objectives natin is actually identify a lease, account for leases by a lessee using the general recognition, and then account for leases by a lessee using the recognition exemption. Okay? So, you can actually look up itong mga topics na to dun sa chapters na sa inyong book. Okay? You can easily see this. Ito yung mga first 2 parts of the chapters regarding this. Okay? So, have you ever wondered kung ano yung lease, yung lot for lease? Okay? So, para siyang rent. Okay? Ang layman's term lang talaga is rent. Okay? For us, accountants, it's actually lease. Okay? So, ano ba itong lease na ito? It's a contract, or a contract is or contains a lease if the contract conveys the right to control the use of an identified asset for a period of time in exchange for consideration. Okay? This is according to PFRS 16. Okay? Point 9. So, binigyan ka daw ng karapatan na gamitin yung isang identified asset. It's either machinery, building, land, okay, kung ano man ang pinapalis sa iyo ni lessor, for a specific period of time, syempre may kapalit in exchange for consideration. So, right to control, identified asset, period of time, exchange for consideration. Okay? So, we have kapag ikaw yung rumerenta, okay, if you were granted the right to control, okay, you are the lessee, okay? If you are the one na may-ari ng asset, okay, na pinarentahan or pinalis, ikaw yung lessor. Okay? So, yon. So, we have here right to control. Ano daw yung right to control? An entity has the right to control the use of an identified asset if it has both. Emphasis natin yung both of the following throughout the period of use. So, we have the right to obtain substantially all of the economic benefits from the use of the identified asset and the right to direct the use of the identified asset. Kung mapapansin nyo, hindi lang siya ordinaryong rent. Okay, kasi kapag ikaw kung titingnan mo, kapag rent lang, merong restrictions. Although sa lease, meron din restrictions. Pero sa rent, parang restricted ka sa ginagawa mo with the asset. For example, you're actually renting a dormitory. Okay? Taga malayo kang lugar, you want to be in the city kasi malapit sa school, so you rent a house, rent an apartment, or rent a dorm, okay, rent a bed space, okay, so parang restricted ka sa gagawin mo, so kumbaga, more on bed space lang, tutulog ka, uuwi, doon mo ilalagay yung gamit mo, pero changing the room, okay, like, ayoko ng white, gusto kong gawin blue, okay? Ayaw ko nandito yung bintana ko. Gusto ko nasa kabila. Okay? Parang hindi mo siya kayang gawin kasi magagalit sa'yo yung landlord mo. Okay? So, ang lease, medyo to the level up siya ng rent. Okay? So, kasi pwede ka daw, meron kang right to obtain substantially all the economic benefits. So, ibig sabihin, pag pag pinalis sa'yo yung property or yung identified asset, lahat ng economic benefits from it, ikaw muna ang sasalo. Okay? So, ikaw muna ang bibiyayaan. Okay? And, syempre, the right to direct the use of the identified asset. So, ikaw ang bahala kung saan mo gagamitin. Okay? So, I'm just going to list this for a specific period of time sa'yo, and in exchange, syempre, for consideration, which is the rent. Okay? Next, yan. We have here a guide. So, pwede nyo tong guide. Actually, guide nyo to. Okay? Sa halip na you just read from the paragraph. So, let's summarize this. Paano ba natin malalaman general recognition if an asset or tawag din, if a business transaction or a contract is actually a lease. Okay? So, una, magtanong ka, is there an identified asset? So, sa usapan nyo ba, in-specify kung ano yung assets na pwede mong i-lease. Kapag ang sagot ay no, agad siyang hindi siya contract, hindi siya lease contract. Okay? Pero pag sinabing yes, magtanong ka uli, does the customer have the right to substantially obtain all of the economic benefits from the use of the identified asset throughout the period of use? Yung walang restriction, yung ibig sabihin kung may dumating na benefits or economic inflow galing dun sa usage of the asset, hindi siya pupunta kay lessor, kundi pupunta siya sa'yo. Okay? Kasi binigyan ka nga ng right to control. Okay? Pag ang sagot mo yung no, hindi siya lease contract. Pag sagot mo yes, magtanong ka ulit. Does the customer have the right to direct the use of the identified asset throughout the period of use? Pag ang sagot mo yung no, siya ay hindi lease contract. Pero pag ang sagot mo yes, siya ay lease. Okay? So, as you can see, dapat lahat ng criteria, identified asset, right to obtain, and right to direct, ay masatisfy niya para masabi mong lease contract siya. Okay? Next. So, ano ba itong identified asset? This is an asset. An asset can be identified by explicitly stating sa contract or implicit. Okay? Specify the time the asset is made available for use by the customer. So, ano ba yung implicit? So, implicit siya. Kung, for example, you have made contract with, ano ba yung mga, for example, yung mga may-ari ng malalaking machineries used for excavation, for road works, okay? Kahit hindi specified sa contract kung ano yung mga assets na ililis sa'yo, basta you are transacting with a client na alam mong ang kanyang identified assets lang is yung mga for road works nga na machineries and equipment, implicit na yon. Okay? So, basta ilagay mo yung pangalan niya, okay? Pangalan ng companies, yung nature ng business niya, yan, implicit na yon. Explicit if ilalagay ni ni lessor kung ano lang yung mga equipment and machinery na pwede mong gamitin. Okay? So, a portion of an asset can be identified if it is physically distinct. Okay? So, maaaring yung ipapahiram sa iyong asset is sobrang laki. For example, mabait yung isang negosyante dahil natenga yung factory, you want to lease the factory for your own use. Now, pwede siyang chop-chopin. Okay? I mean, pwede siyang hati-hatiin. Alin lang bang part of the factory that you can use? Yung assembly, yung bang mga equipment, yung mga machineries ba, yung land, yung space. Okay? So, as long as it can be identified and it is physically distinct, pwede siyang gawin. Okay? Next, substantive substitution rights. So, ano to? A customer does not have the right to use an identified asset if the supplier has the substantive right to substitute the asset throughout the period. So, tandaan nyo to. Kapag pwede siyang i-substitute ni supplier or yung kausap mo, okay, pwede niyang palitan yung identified asset, okay, na initial nyong napagkasunduan, wala kang right to use. Okay? So, hindi siya pwede. Okay? Hindi siya papasok doon sa criteria. Okay? A supplier's right to substitute an asset is substantive if both of the following conditions exist. Okay? Substantive daw ha, ibig sabihin malaking impact or important. The supplier has a practical ability to substitute alternative assets throughout the period of use. Parang ang pangit, kumbaga, may kontrata tayo, sabi mo pwede kong gamitin yung land, pwede kong gamitin yung building, pwede kong gamitin yung machinery equipment, pero bakit throughout the 10 years, parang nagbabago yung isip mo, parang hindi na pwede ito, tapos palitan ko na lang nito, parang ang gulo mo. Okay, so ganon. The supplier would benefit economically from the exercise of its right to substitute the asset. For example, meron din siyang ka-transact na kagaya mo, gusto din mag-lease ng some of the identified assets. Ngayon, mas malaki yung offer niya. Kapag sinubstitute niya, yung binigay sa yung binigyan ka ng right to control a certain asset. So, for example, asset A, okay? Pero sabi nung ka-transact niya who offers greater consideration, okay, na mas gusto niya yung asset A kaysa doon sa ibibigay ng asset B, nag-substitute na lang. Sabi sa'yo, pre, arin na lang asset B ang iyo. The same din naman, pero parang may tawag din may sentimental value si asset A kay ganto. So, bigay ko muna sa kanya. Pero itong asset B, the same din naman, ganyan. Huwag kang mag-alala, ganyan. Okay, so you don't have the right to use the identified asset. So, huwag ka na umasang lease siya. Okay? So, pag ganon, it's just an ordinary, hindi kasi siya papatak doon sa finance lease. Okay? So, hindi siya papatak under the other conditions, okay, regarding leases. Okay? Kasi una pa lang, sala na. Sala na siya sa criteria. Okay? So, right to direct the use. So, ano to? The customer has the right to direct how and for what purpose the asset is used throughout the period. So, yun nga. Right to direct the use. Wala lang. In-emphasize lang ko ano siya. So, the customer has the right to direct how and what purpose. So, sa kasunduan, pwedeng hindi sabihin ni customer or yung magli-lease kung saan niya gagamitin. Okay? So, ikaw, parang kayo, bahala na. Okay? Bahala ka na kung anong gusto mong gawin dyan. If itong commercial space, gusto mong gawin for, shamayan, restaurant, or damitan, boutique. Okay? As long as our kasunduan is you're going to lease this area. And, ikaw na bahala for how and for what purpose. Okay? So, yun. Next. Accounting for lease by lessee. Okay, so ito na tayo sa computation. So, we have accounting for leases, general recognition. Lessee recognizes both. Both. This is a new standard. Okay, so, actually, nung kami ay nag-aaral, hindi ito yung gamit namin kasi old standard na siya. So, for those who are using old books, you have to be careful. Okay, kasi baka old standard yung ginagamit mo. Okay? I can recognize old standards. Kasi, syempre, yun yung pinag-aralan namin 5 years. Tapos biglang, after naming mag-board exam, saka siya binago. So, this is actually very new to me. Pero dahil tinuro ko siya last year, nagamay ko na siya. Okay? So, be careful ha, yung gumagamit ng old books. So, tingnan nyo if halos parehas yung aming sinasabi or parehas na parehas. Okay? So, yan. For those who are using the new books, don't worry. Updated yan. Okay? So, again, both lease liability and then the right of use asset. Okay? So, we have a recognition exemption for short-term and low-value leases. Bakit may recognition exemption? Kasi short-term yung lease and ang nililis na identified assets is actually low value lang. Okay, so lessee recognizes lease payments as expense. So kapag kapag short term siya, okay, yung lease mo short term at low value lang yung mga identified assets na lease siya, pero yung lease payments is expense over the lease term using straight line basis or another more appropriate basis. Hindi na siya magre-recognize ng lease liability or right of use asset. Nag-e-expense na lang siya sa lease payments. Okay? So, yun. Okay? So, we go back. Yan. I have here a summary excerpt, okay, from one of my sources. Okay, thank you so much for my source. Okay, para to guide you in computation of initial and subsequent measurement of lease liability and then the right of use asset. So, magsimula tayo kay right of use asset. Okay, right of use asset is an asset. Okay, so nandun siya sa asset part kasi binigyan ka ng karapatan, asset mo siya. Okay? So, paano yung initial measurement ni right of use asset? Una, the initial amount of the liability, you have to identify of the lease liability. Add mo lang yung lease payments made to lessor at or before commencement. So, iga-guide ka ng problem or even sa, if accountant ka na, you have to identify the lease payments, yung binayad na sa lessor, at or before commencement. Bakit? Kasi merong initial deposit, diga? Merong security, initial deposit, 2 months advance, 3 months advance. Okay, familiar, lalo na doon sa mga nagdo-dorm. Okay? So, yon. Then, minus lease incentives received. Minus ha. Bakit? Kasi baka mamaya mabait pala itong si lessor. Okay, binibigyan ka ng incentives. Okay, so less mo siya. Okay? Then, add initial direct costs. So, malamang sa malamang, magkakaroon ka ng initial direct costs. What are these costs? These are the costs that are directly attributable para makuha mo yung asset to its intended use. Okay? So, i-identify mo yung cost na kapag hindi mo siya binayaran, hindi mo magagamit yung identified asset or hindi mo i-execute yung lease. Okay? Then, add estimated cost of removal and of restoring lease asset. So, this is usually the case of yung area is just, parang bare, walang laman. Parang space lang talaga siya. So, ikaw yung bahalang magpaganda. Okay? Ikaw, kung gusto mong design na parang coffee shop, or gusto mong design na parang Hungry Hippo, or whatever that you want to have as a negosyo there, a water refilling station. So, pwede mong gawin siya as kasunduan sa list ninyo. Okay? So, kasama siya sa estimated cost of removing and restoring a leased asset. Okay? So, yan. Next. We have subsequent measurements sa right of use asset. Okay, subsequent ha. Similar to a purchased asset, that is, measured under cost model, revaluation model, or fair value model as appropriate. So, familiar? Okay, you have this intermediate 1B. 1A, 1B. Okay? So, that's cost model, revaluation model, or fair value model as appropriate. Okay? So, this is just your guide. Okay? Then, we have lease liability. This is, syempre, dahil this is in the books of the lessee, meron siyang obligation to pay the lease. Okay? So, paano? Initial measurement muna, you have to identify the fixed future payments, including in substance fixed, less any lease incentives receivable, excuse me, plus payments in optional extension periods if extension is reasonably certain. Okay, so just remember this. You'll be guided naman as you answer. Okay, so we have add variable payments linked to an index rate based on level of index rate at commencement. Ma'am, may variable payments? Yes, kasi minsan, based on conditions, okay, present sa contract, merong variable payments. Ma'am, but variable payments? Hindi laging yun yung babayaran mo per month or per year. Or meron kang mga additional payments na binabayaran with regards to the list na depending on a certain condition. Okay, variable payments yon. Yung fixed future payments, so pwede siyang yung mismong monthly mo. Okay? Plus payments in optional extension periods if extension is reasonably certain. Bakit may extension periods? So, kasi, for example, nilease mo yung property for 20 years, nag-lapse yung 20 years, pero gusto mo pa rin tumagal. So, sa halip na mag-create kayo ng bagong lease agreement, mag-extend na lang kayo ng lease. Okay? So, papayag o hindi. Then we have plus amounts expected to be payable under residual value guarantees. Okay, so residual value guarantees. amounts expected to be payable under residual value guarantees. Okay? So we have plus exercise price of a purchase option if exercise is reasonably certain. Ma'am, ang yung purchase option is where the lessor actually offers you a chance to be the owner of the identifiable assets. Okay? So, yun yung purchase option. Okay? So, if you want to exercise the price given sa purchase option, okay, if reasonably certain na i-exercise mo, i-add mo siya. If you are not actually reasonably certain at kinukutuban ka lang, hindi pwede. Plus, termination penalties is if termination is reasonably certain. Okay? So, kasi alam niyo, kapag ang kontrata is 10 years, 10 years dapat. Pero kapag nagbagong isip mo, naging 6 years na lang, there will be penalties. Okay? So, be it na 50,000, 70,000, depending on the kasunduan. So, mag-iingat kayo pag pumipirma kayo ng kontrata kasi maliliit yung font ng penalties char. Okay? So, yan. So, you just have to remember all of this. Okay? So, ma'am, paano kapag applicable lang siya sa fixed future payments? Eh, di fixed future payments lang, okay? Kung walang variable payments, huwag kang mag-alala, eh di huwag mong pansinin. Kung walang expected to be payable under residual value guarantees, huwag kang mag-alala, huwag mong pansinin. Kapag hindi reasonably certain yung purchase option, huwag kang mag-alala, huwag mong pansinin. Pag walang termination penalties, huwag mong pansinin. Eh di eto lang, okay? And so on and so forth, okay? Binibigyan ka lang ng isang buong guide on how to actually compute for lease liability. Okay? All of this is discounted at rate implicit in the lease or lessee's incremental borrowing rate. Now, remember guys, ang priority is the interest rate implicit. Implicit interest rate. Okay? Pag wala, saka mo gagamitin si lessee. Lessee's incremental borrowing rate. Ma'am, why did you emphasize lessees? Kasi bibigay din ang lessor's incremental borrowing rate in order for you to be tested if alam mo talaga. Okay, lessee's incremental borrowing rate. Okay, so yan. Next, we have subsequent measurement. I hope this is all clear sa inyo. Okay. Subsequent measurement, we have similar to an amortized cost, financial liability, interest is computed using the effective interest method. Payments are apportioned to both interest and a reduction to lease liability. Okay, so para ka lang nag-amortize. Okay, so ganun lang siya. Kasi nga liability siya, para lang ding bonds payable, notes payable, pero this is regarding sa lease liability. Okay, so yan. Challenging ba? Hindi naman. Okay, medyo gamayan lang. Sa first try nyo, challenging siya. Kasi syempre, everything that is first is talagang bago lang sa paningin. Don't be hard on yourself. Ganyan din ako before. Okay, so yan. So we have a discount rate. So sabi ko nga, this interest rate implicit in the list. If wala, or not determinable, then saka kagagamit ng lessees, incremental borrowing rate. Okay? Next, separate components of a contract. May ganyan? Oo, may mga add-ons. So, entity accounts for each lease component of a contract separately. Okay? From the non-lease components of the contract. Okay? Unless he allocates a consideration in the contract to each lease component on the basis of relative standalone prices. Excuse me. So, ito is alam naman natin kung paano mag-allocate, di ba? You just have, para siya nung points. You just have to identify alin yung relative standalone prices, okay? And then, you formulate a ratio based on that relative standalone prices for each of the components of the lease. Then, from the consideration sa contract, multiply mo lang siya dun sa ratios formulated based on relative standalone prices of the lease. Then, yun na yung kanyang amount for the consideration, okay? So, yun yung allocated amount niya from the whole consideration. Okay? So, payments for activities or costs that do not transfer goods or services to the lessee are not a separate component of the contract. Remember this. Yun daw mga activities and costs na wala namang bigay, okay, na goods or services sa lessee, hindi siya separate component. Okay, the payments for these items are included in the total consideration that is allocated to the separately identified components. Again, kapag merong payments for certain activities and costs na wala namang transfer of goods and services, hindi siya separate component, bagkus siya ay part ng total consideration na i-allocate sa separately identifiable components of the contract. Okay? So, next, we have initial direct costs. So, sa initial direct costs, the lessee capitalizes initial direct costs as follows. Okay, so tandaan lang, we have here a guide, general recognition. It is treated as part of the cost of the right-of-use asset and included in depreciation. Okay? Ma'am, magko-compute ang depreciation sa right-of-use asset? Yes. We will see this given example. Okay? This one, recognition exemption. Paano kapag siya ay for short-term and low-value leases? It is treated as prepaid rent, okay, and recognizes expense over the straight line under the straight line basis or another more appropriate basis. Okay, so yun lang naman. So we have here lease payments made to lessor at or before commencement date. So ano yon? Ito nga yung advance rent. Yung sinabi ko kanina, yung initial deposit, initial deposits and a month advance, okay, depende sa agreement. So we have paano kapag advance rent, paano siya ang recognition niya. So this is where when rentals are payable at beginning of each period, excluded from the initial measurement of the lease liability but included in the initial measurement of the right-of-use asset. So, ito ay part ng right-of-use asset at hindi part ng lease liability. Kita naman natin kanina doon sa summary of initial measurement na wala talaga sa computation ni lease liability siya. Okay? Tingnan natin doon sa recognition exemption. So, it is actually treated as a prepaid rent. Okay? And expense siya allocated straight line basis. Okay? Next, we have lease bonus. So, ano tong lease bonus? This is an amount in addition to periodic rentals paid by a lessee of the lessor in order to induce granting of the leasehold rights to the lessee. Lease bonus is the opposite of lease incentive. So, nakalagay na, lease bonus is the opposite of lease incentive. So, bakit may lease bonus? Kasi baka maganda yung posisyon nung space, okay? Or nung baka maganda yung identifiable asset na gusto mong i-lease. Ngayon, maraming nag-aagawan. Okay? Paano mo mapapapayag si lessor na sa iyo ibigay? Okay? So, magbibigay ka ng lease bonus. Okay? So, although some parts is para siyang suhol, char. Okay? Pero, this is actually the case of parang bigay mo na din to kay lessor para paboran ka. Okay? So, same accounting as advance rent above. So, ibig sabihin, kasama siya sa right of use asset, pero hindi siya kasama sa lease liability. Okay? So, sa recognition exemption, the same. It is treated as prepaid rent also and expense siya through straight line basis. Okay? So, yun lang naman ang theories. So, I've separated the theories. Para full discussion tayo ng examples sa guided exercises. Okay, so see you guys when I see you. I hope you understand, please. Okay, don't be hard on yourself. Medyo bago-bago pa din kasi yung topic, So, yun lang naman. Bye!